Webflow versus Framer. If you are a web developer or marketer, you have probably asked yourself this question. And so today we're going to break down the difference between these two tools. Now, a lot of content and a lot of opinions out there discuss which is better, the Webflow designer or the Framer designer. And that's really important. But what many have not talked about is how their content management or CMS systems match up. So in this video, we're going to go deep on how the Webflow CMS stacks up with the Framer CMS. So we're going to grade it on 5 key criteria, and in the end, we'll share who ultimately has the better CMS. Now, CMS or content management system is key for building out blogs, SEO pages, or really anything where you have a lot of templated pages. So in this video, the 5 criteria we're going to use to judge the Webflow CMS versus the Framer CMS are, first of all, CMS limits. So how many collections and pages can you create? Secondly, plugins and integrations. Third, the actual user interface. Fourth, how many supported fields they have. And finally, fifth, the rich text field specifically. So with that out of the way, let's compare. At the end, we'll choose our overall winner when it comes to the CMS. Let us know in the comments if we got it right. Webflow CMS and Framer CMS is always a hot topic, so we're curious what you guys think. The first question we often hear people ask about the Webflow CMS and Framer CMS are, what are the limits? And by that, there are basically 2 limits that matter when it comes to a CMS. First of all is, how many collections can you create? This is equivalent to how many templates, right? So here I've got a blog post collection, a changelogs collection, right? How many of these you can create is limiting for what you can do with the CMS. The second big one is the actual items or pages, right? So within my blog post collection here, I've got hundreds of these different blog posts. And so each row is equivalent to a new page that's getting created by my CMS. So that's the other key limit to look out for, is CMS item limits. Luckily for both Webflow and Framer, they publish their CMS limits directly on the pricing pages. So if you go to Webflow, you can start to see where you get limited. Now, on their free plan, they actually do give you access to the CMS. So you get 20 collections and 50 items. So that is pretty generous to start. And beyond that, you'll need to upgrade to their CMS plan to start to get some higher functionality. So again, 20 collections, 2,000 CMS items. And before even getting to enterprise, you can go all the way up to 20,000 different items. And so the Webflow pricing in general, when it comes to limits, is pretty forgiving. You can do a ton with 20,000 CMS items and 40 CMS collections. On the Framer side, you're going to see a similar set of limitations. So here they call it out under Publish. On their mini plan, you actually don't get access to CMS collections, but once you upgrade to basic, you start to get some collections. So 2 collections and 1,000 pages. This is a little bit less than Webflow on the low end, but as you get higher into their business plans, you can actually get up to 30,000 pages before upgrading to enterprise. So all in all, it really depends on which pricing plan you're on to determine if you're getting more CMS limits from Webflow or Framer. Overall, when it comes to CMS limits, we're going to call this one a tie. Webflow and Framer have fairly similar limits. It depends on the plan that you're on to decide who has better ones. Ultimately, you can do more or less the same thing, whether you're on Webflow or you're on Framer. So here, category 1, we're going to call it a tie. Let's talk about integrations. So integrations let you power up your website and of course the CMS. So Webflow and Framer both have fairly robust plugin and integration directories where you can see exactly what you can do to take your CMS to the next level. And in both Framer and Webflow, you can access these plugins directly through the designer as well. So over in Webflow, that's literally as simple as clicking on this little apps button from the left. And in Framer, you're going to see something similar where you just click on synced and then add. And you can browse their entire plugin store. Now, only a fraction of these apps and plugins actually interact with the CMS, so you'll see a lot of really great apps that just aren't relevant for this comparison. But when it comes directly to the CMS, you're going to see a few apps that are available in just one or the other. Now, we're of course biased, but we think the Whalesync app is a very, very important one for CMS functionality. What it lets you do is connect the Webflow CMS with Airtable, Notion, Google Sheets, Supabase, and a handful of other really important apps. Framer, on the other hand, doesn't have a Whalesync integration yet, and so that is fairly limiting for the CMS. Without Whalesync, Framer doesn't get to benefit from the two-way syncs that Whalesync provides for Webflow. And so fundamentally, the CMS is just a bit more limited in Framer when it comes to integrations and plugins. That being said, Framer is trying in this area. They have built some free plugins like Google Sheets and Notion here, where without even signing up for another tool, you can instantly start to bring in some data into your Framer CMS. But as expected from a free plugin, these are fairly limited. They don't let you bring in multiple tables. There are many field types they don't support. They certainly don't support two-way sync. And so while Framer gives you a few tools to get you off the ground, their integration and plugin marketplace is just a bit smaller. Aside from syncing the CMS, there are also other plugins in general that you might want to use here. And when you look at the breadth of the Framer store, they've got a total of about 100 plugins compared to Webflow, which has closer to 250. A lot of this comes from the fact that Webflow launched their marketplace a couple years ago, whereas Framers is a bit newer. But overall, today at least, you're going to see more plugins and integrations available on the Webflow side. The clear winner when it comes to integrations and plugins, at least today, is Webflow. For all the reasons we just discussed, Webflow has more plugins, more integrations, and specifically a Whalesync two-way sync integration, so your CMS is much more powerful using their apps. That being said, Framer's developing a lot in their marketplace right now, and so I wouldn't be surprised if this changes over the next couple of years. So far, we've talked about a few things like limits and integrations that are sort of happening in the background of your CMS. Now let's compare Webflow and Framer directly on their UI or their user interface. And in Webflow, let's start here. You can essentially click around to move between collections and open up a item or page here to edit it directly. Now you'll see a pretty straightforward situation here where you can update different fields. They have things like dates, toggles, even reference fields to other collections. And overall, I'd say the interface for Webflow CMS is fairly straightforward. It's nothing too fancy. It really isn't that modern, but it gets the job done and is pretty simple for anyone to pick up. On the Framer side, you're going to see a very similar type of outline where collections live on the left and items or pages live on the right here. As you click into a page, you'll see these fields appear on the right. And what you'll notice pretty quickly is that Framer has a much more modern UI. It just feels like something that's been designed in the last few years as opposed to 4 or 5 years ago. It lets you click around between blog posts more quickly. It's easier to load. You can see little previews that are actually nice around their images. And each field is a little bit more editable and a little just simpler to go about. They have the same idea of dates and images, but it's just a little bit more friendly to a new user. While Webflow and Framer both have fairly straightforward CMS UIs, we're going to give the win to Framer here. It's a little bit easier to use, a little bit more modern, and just a UI that I'd like to spend a little bit more time in. Now let's talk a little bit about field types. Field types are a huge aspect of a CMS because they determine what type of data you can show on your pages. Now, as you can see here, when you're in the Webflow CMS, you can see next to each field the type or supported field type that it is. So here is a switch. This is a date field. These are references. These are all really important and key field types that Webflow has added over the years. To see a full list of all the supported field types, when you go to add a new one, you'll see this pop up over here. And you can start to see everything that they support: text, rich text, multi-image, video, link, and so on and so forth. Over on the Framer side, you're going to see something very similar. When I go to edit fields, you can see the different types that are available for each one we've already added. And when I go to add a new one, you'll see a drop-down with the different types that they support. You're going to see a lot of overlap here, things like text, date, links, and images, but there are some differences. Ultimately, when it comes to field types, Webflow gets the win here as well. Webflow just has more field types. So specifically, things like the video link and the multi-image are just missing from the Framer CMS. Now, over time, I expect Framer to add more supported field types. So again, I don't know how long this advantage will last, but as of today, the Webflow CMS lets you do a little bit more when it comes to field types. We just talked about a lot of different field types, so as a final category, let's talk about one of the most important ones, which is rich text. So rich text is what lets you have things like this with headings and bold and bullet points that enable pages to become blog posts. So the rich text field is one that has a little bit more importance than potentially all the others. And when you go into Webflow and take a look at how this looks, let's open up one of our blog posts here and scroll to our rich text field. You can see how this all works. If I hop into this rich text and let's say I want to add a heading, I click this plus button and can add a heading. I can do the same thing for things like images, videos, and even HTML embeds and code blocks. So this is super powerful in the Webflow CMS that not only can I edit this, and create bolded font, but I can literally put in a full code block of whatever I want, and this will be part of my rich text on my page. As you've seen before, Framer has a similar setup. You click into a page and you'll see this rich text editor. And again, just to see how this works, I can up here, click heading, and I can start to type in my heading. I can insert a bunch of different things like images and even different bits like little, not actual code embeds, but code blocks like this. Now, Framer is missing that really important code embed feature that Webflow has that enables a lot, but the rich text experience is a lot better. Typing and writing in here actually feels fairly nice. It might not be quite as nice as Notion, but it is a pretty solid experience for just typing and writing and creating rich text. Webflow, on the other hand, has that very powerful embed feature, but you don't actually really want to be going into that rich text editor that much. That's why connecting your CMS with other tools like Notion and Airtable can be so powerful, because that rich text editor is fairly limited. So when it comes to rich text fields, this one's a bit of a toss-up. We're going to give the slight edge to Framer because the rich text editing experience is just so much better. But if you need code embeds, if you need some powerful things in there, some folks are going to prefer the Webflow CMS rich text field. So overall, who's our winner? We're going to go with Webflow. Webflow CMS is ultra powerful. It brings a ton of collections items on almost all of their plans. It has more supported field types and includes things like code embeds. And the cherry on top is that it has a Whalesync integration, and so you can two-way sync the Webflow CMS with other tools like Notion, Airtable, Google Sheets, Supabase, and more. Now, this is not to say that the Framer CMS isn't great. It really is, and for many use cases, you're going to be totally fine with the Framer CMS. But when you need a little bit more power, Webflow has that benefit today. So, did we get it right? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Webflow versus Framer is going to be a debate we expect will continue for the next few years, and the CMS is just one key part. So we hope this was helpful and hope to hear from you guys soon.